Our next speaker is Camila Escalante. Camila is the woman behind Kawsachun News, a media outlet which is based in Bolivia. She's also known for her correspondence work reporting around Latin America. And she's also Latin American correspondent for Press TV. Camila's family are FMLN revolutionary former combatants. She was previously based in Quito, Havana, and Caracas. She's currently based in Trópico of Cochabamba and reporting on the campesino movements across the continent. She will be on the ground covering this is slightly dated. So she will be on the ground covering the elections in Brazil. So Camila, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you for the invitation. And yes, I'll be in Brazil covering the elections. We are no longer, I'm no longer based in the Trópico of Cochabamba. We've moved this year to La Paz to be sort of closer to, well, first of all, the social movements here, but also this is sort of the seat of government. And we have a lot of opportunities to cover a lot of great things here in La Paz, but we're still based in Bolivia. I wanted to, inspired by what Steve said, yesterday we celebrated 197 years of independence here in Bolivia. And we heard the speech by President Luis Arce in Sucre, which is actually the capital of Bolivia. And he made some remarks about the conflict and the need for peace in the world right now. But he said that there cannot be peace so long as we have this history that is ongoing of foreign interventions, of interventionist wars, of blockades and sanctions that have been painful to humanity, that we put so much weight and there's so much propaganda and discourse around the conflict taking place in Ukraine, and of course, all of the harms and violence that people are suffering and living through. But in fact, we have been plagued with intervention and war and even death and bombings right here in our lands and territories in a scramble for resources from the imperialists. And this is ongoing. This has been nonstop, and it didn't begin when this military operation began in February of this year. So things couldn't be clearer than they are today here, where we are in Latin America. They've been extraordinarily clear over the last 6 months on the left in Latin America and in the last 2 years. And, I think we can't wait until the start of the next war to call into question some of the so-called leftists who have stood by the imperialist powers of our world and against the global majority when this special operation began. I think it's highly suspicious that there continue to be leftists in the world, in the global north, who fail to see that the global majority has a distinct position from them on this issue. They have dismissed the positions of anti-imperialist parties, of the social movements, and of our leaders of the revolutions here in Latin America and the Caribbean, thinking that they have a better position, when it's we here in the global South, in Latin America and the Caribbean, where I'm speaking, who are fighting in defense of our natural resources, against imperialist plunder, amid everything that's going on. And that's becoming clearer and clearer by the day. Leaders such as Evo Morales and President Nicolas Maduro were the first out the gates to call for an end to imperialist NATO expansion and have warned of the dangers of these extremist far-right white supremacist Nazi forces that are being defended and platformed and protected and uplifted by European countries in North America, and imperialists and fascists all over the world. So I would say that there is, in fact, a consistent left position here in Latin America, in contrast with, what Radhika has said, how we framed it, that there lacks a position that is consistent and coherent in the global north. That position here in Latin America continues to be against NATO imperialist expansion, against new manufactured pretexts for encroaching on our territories with new US military bases, the United States military bases And Southcom, its Southern Command here within Latin America and the Caribbean, is the representation of NATO on our continent, and it has the most bases of any country. Russia and China, nor any other country in the world has a presence anywhere remotely comparable to what the United States has all around our territory, particularly in Colombia, where there are 7 US military bases active right now. Today, Colombia, of course, is celebrating the inauguration of Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez. And it's a very important date, a very momentous time for us. And it's a huge achievement for the people of Colombia and Latin America to see Iván Duque out the door today. But that's because Iván Duque is bringing NATO and the US and military forces to our continent to set up permanently. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of them. And our position is also against additional plundering of our natural resources and the dismantling and privatization of our strategic nationalized industries. Juan Ramon Quintana was a former minister of the Evo Morales government. And he gave a talk here. He's given several talks to try to help bring clarity to the situation here to the social movements in Bolivia since the conflict began. And he said the West, the European Union, the United States, NATO, what they're trying to do is survive through their political, economic, financial, and cultural crisis, because the West has not given any answer to humanity. The West today is synonymous with war, destruction, weapons, atomic arsenals. What is the culture of the West, he asks? We're coming from 500 years of mutilating our ears, cutting off our noses, cutting off our hands, dismembering us, leaving horses to dismember us. That's what the left has left with us, comrades. And it is a culture of destroying nature, Mother Earth, and it doesn't cease. It doesn't cease in its compulsive materialistic appetite to wage war, to appropriate other people's strategic resources. And so Russia and China are simply not coming for our resources. There do exist private investment projects and extractivist projects involving companies from these countries. It's absurd to point this out given the massive presence of Canadian, US, and European mining companies, and given the long list of blatant meddling in internal affairs of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the well-documented coups and in their funding of political and opposition groups, which is ongoing. There's, countless instances can be named of this in recent history, and it continues today. And I think it's just very, blatantly obvious, like all that has happened with the energy crisis and the United States descending on Caracas once again, and every single other country that has energy, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana, and begging and demanding and trying to barter for access to our resources. It's very clear what this is all about. This is a scrambling for new ways, new pretexts being created to come in and swoop up our resources. And if you listen to any of the press conferences, speaking events, and the interviews or statements of the Southcom commander, General Laura Richardson, you'll see that they're very clear about their fascination and their obsession with our natural minerals, with our rocks, with everything we have here, and that we have to offer, and what they still continue to consider their backyard. And so we're seeing here in Latin America a witch hunt in our region, in which Washington has said either they're with NATO or the West and the US, or they're against us. That is the choice that they're giving us. And so anyone who attempts to be so-called neutral here is being put into the category of pro-Russia, and we are subject to US blackmail and intimidation and pressure here. And that blackmail and intimidation, it takes the form of blocking loans, of imposing new additional sanctions, as has been waged against the countries that are closest to Russia and China, namely Nicaragua and Venezuela. And so, no one is sanctioning the US or the EU for their plundering wars or their, violent and, crimes against humanity and war crimes in the Middle East. And so beyond inflation and the loss of access to inputs for production, the various ways in which our productive sectors and industries are being effective here, and all the harsh economic effects on the working class of the Caribbean and Latin America, and how difficult it is for people to access and afford fuel and gas and food. We face the real threat of increased militarization and hostility towards our peoples and governments because we're rejecting these North American imperialist NATO policies. And again, it's no coincidence that we're seeing increased hostility and new attempts at destabilization against those countries who are choosing to reject the NATO propaganda and partner with and develop with and move forward and advance with China and Russia. And so, yeah, the most important consequence of this conflict for our region is this greater pressure for the grab of our natural strategic resources, our oil, our gas, our minerals, our lithium. And they couldn't be more overt about it. And I think that this is radicalizing people here. People here already began, when this conflict broke out, hearing from our leaders, President Nicolas Maduro, Evo Morales, President Luis Arce, but it's becoming more and more clear what this is about. This is not about so-called, democracy or human rights or any of the sorts. Sorry, I'm seeing someone's full screen here, but it is about NATO expansion into other territories and trying to come around and take things that don't belong to them and destine us to servitude and just an absolute terror and tyranny of the imperialist North being imposed on the peoples of the global South. And I think it's being rejected, and I think the people of the North need to understand why it's being rejected and why this position is becoming so common here in Latin America and throughout the global North.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.